We are fortunate to have Jessica Rhodes, founder and president of Interview Connections, with us today. And today's topic is how to deliver a brand-strengthening interview as a guest expert. Jessica, welcome.
Hi, Dot. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here. This is really full circle because my first speaking engagement was actually at Podcast Movement many moons ago. I think it was like in 2014. I led a panel at Podcast Movement. So I was so honored when Jared reached out and asked if I would do this. I'm so excited to be here. So I've got a great presentation for you all here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I'll be able to take questions at the end as well. So make sure you put them in the chat, in the comments, and we'll definitely get there. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and maximize this. So hopefully everyone can see that. So today's presentation, Monetize the Mic, how to deliver a brand strengthening interview as a guest expert. That is what we are talking about today. So I am Jessica Rhodes. I am the creator of the podcast booking industry. So as you all know, being in the podcast movement university community, there is this whole sub-industry of podcast booking. And when I founded Interview Connections 8 years ago in 2013, we were first to market. There was nobody pitching and booking podcast interviews specifically. So I was first to market and have really been leading along with my business partner, Margie, this industry. As we grow our company, we're at multiple seven figures now. We represent hundreds of entrepreneurs who get booked on podcasts. And we, love teaching and educating people on the strategy of being a podcast guest and how to do it in a way that helps you grow your brand. I am also a mentor and a business coach to 6 and 7 figure entrepreneurs. In addition to doing podcast booking, we also have a business coaching and mastermind program. And I am, of course, a podcaster. I've had my show, which is called Monetize the Mic, for over 6 years. And I co-host that with my business partner, Margie. And I was inspired to start my podcast after reading Jared's book. So again, I love the podcast movement community. It's been a huge part of my story and journey in the podcasting space. So just some fun facts about me. Now we got the business facts out of the way. I am married with 2 kids. I have 5 chickens and 3 cats. I am sober 14 months with no alcohol, which has been a huge transformation in my life. And I live in Rhode Island, in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. So first, I just want you to share in the comments some fun facts about you that you can share in podcast interviews. That's going to be a part of this training here. A part of delivering a brand strengthening interview is sharing about you, not just your expertise, not just the thing that you want to get promotion for, not just about your podcast, but about you, right? Interviews are about your story. So I want you to just share a little bit. What are some fun facts? You saw some fun facts about me. And just again, I want to go back because I'm like teaching, but also leading by example. I always start with like, here's the professional intro, but I'm more than, a business owner and a mentor and all of that. Like, this is really who I am. Like, where are you most likely to see me? Probably, wearing that rain jacket, like dealing with my chickens, playing with my kids. So put in the chat some fun facts about you that would really help people connect with you on a more personal level, get to know the real you in a podcast interview, in a conversation. So you can just go ahead and put that in the comments. So let's talk about who this training is for. So you're here. You are a business owner who wants to appear on more podcasts as a guest expert to strengthen your brand, increase your visibility, and attract more leads. This training is also for people who if you have your own podcast and the size of your audience has plateaued, you need to get in front of new podcast listeners in order to grow an audience. So I'm sure that those of you watching, there may be business owners here. There may be people that don't have a business, but have a podcast that they're really serious about building the brand of. So this is for everyone. So if you really look at your podcast as a brand, or you have a business and you want to be strengthening your brand as a guest on other podcasts, you are in the right place. You are watching the right training. This training is also for people who are getting interviewed on podcasts sporadically. So maybe you are already getting interviewed there. Maybe you're participating in like exchanges where people are like, hey, let's interview each other. So you're getting interviewed here and there, but it's not consistent. And while it's fun, you're not really able to track tangible results from these interviews. And so we'll talk about like how you can be a podcast guest more consistently and attribute results from your time as a podcast guest. Because definitely having a good time is important. But I'm a business owner, I'm an entrepreneur. I want to help you and I want to see results, right? So we're going to talk about that today. And you want to learn how to be a better guest. So it's not just about, the sales and the results, but you want to be a better guest so you can show up. It's actually, you can't just show up anymore. You have to perform. You have to be a really compelling guest to see results. Okay, who is this training not for? So my trainings are not for everyone, okay? So number one, if you don't have a brand to strengthen, probably not going to get a whole lot out of this training. So you've got to have a brand, okay? You have to have some type of brand, whether it's your business, your podcast, you need to have a brand, and we're going to talk about strengthening it, okay? So this isn't about creating a brand. You have to have a brand that you're ready to strengthen. This training is not for business owners who are looking for a quick fix to their problems. Okay, there is no overnight success. As I said, I started my business 8 years ago. I've been podcasting since 2014. As far as I can tell, working full-time in the podcasting industry, there is literally nothing that's going to create results overnight. So if you're looking for a quick fix, silver bullet, overnight success, you're not going to find it here. This training is not for business owners who don't like networking or talking to people. Believe it or not, I have had calls with people that are like, I hate networking. I hate talking to people. You're going to have a really hard time doing podcast interviews if that's how you feel. So no judgment, but this is probably going to be a difficult strategy for you. And this is not for business owners who like to test strategies out in really short stints and don't stick with strategies long term. So again, no judgment. If you like to kind of try different things every so often, that's fine. But what I'm talking about here is doing something consistently long-term, because that's how you create results and see success. Okay. Podcasting is the number one way to strengthen your brand and control the narrative of your brand. As you can see, just from a couple of examples here, the most successful people in the world are leaning in and investing their time and money in podcasting. I mean, literally, US presidents, Bill Gates, like Brene Brown, Michelle Obama, Rashida Jones, Kristen Bell, like everyone's podcasting now. It's obviously, I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? It's Podcast Movement University. Y'all know this, but I just really wanted to show this of like, this is it. And they're all using interviews on other people's podcasts to promote their shows. Literally, the way that I found out about each of these shows is because they were interviewed on somebody else's podcast, right? Bill Gates was interviewed on Armchair Expert and he promoted his podcast. That's how I found out about it. Right. So Barack Obama was interviewed on another podcast, and that's how I discovered he had his own show. This is how people promote their brand. This is how people build their brand. Even the most famous, successful people in the world, they are using interviews on podcasts to like control the narrative about your brand. And I want to give a really specific example of how big time successful celebrities actually use podcast interviews to control the narrative of their brand. So check this out. Candace Cameron Bure. If anyone's millennial and you watched Full House, I know I grew up watching Full House. So DJ Tanner, she had a little bit of a flub on TikTok. One of her TikToks got a really bad reaction. And she went on podcasts to control the narrative about it. I was listening to the Wind Down podcast and I heard her interviewed and I was like, oh my gosh, she is using interviews on other people's podcasts as a way to get ahead of this PR nightmare she's in. It's incredible. So when I heard that, I was just like, oh my gosh, like this interviews on other people's podcasts, it's not just a way to like promote your business. And she does that too. And so many people do. But when there's like a PR nightmare, she's going to go on a long form podcast and share her side of what happened, because that is something that you just can't capture in an article or a social media post. So I just thought this was such a great, timely example. Now, many of us being, small business owners, independent podcasters, we may not have like big PR nightmares like this. But I just wanted to share this as an example that this is a proven way. Interviews on other people's podcasts is a proven strategy to control the narrative about your brand and to build your brand. So today I am going to show you how to share the real you in your podcast interviews, how to write interview topics and questions that support your brand, magnetically attract new clients and listeners when you're a guest, and map out your podcast guesting strategy. So let's dive in. So, number one, share the real you in your podcast interviews. So, you remember at the beginning, I talked about, I prompted you, like, put in the comments some fun facts about yourself, because this is really about sharing the real you. It's about sharing personal facts, obviously, that you're comfortable sharing, that humanizes your brand and helps people connect with it, right? So, what part of your story and your journey made you who you are, but on the surface doesn't feel relevant to your business or your podcast, right? So, there's, and we've seen this journey with our show, Monetize the Mic. Our show, our podcast is about leveraging interviews on other people's podcasts. It's about growing your visibility and building your business. But we talk about, personal development and transformation. And on the surface, it's like, is that relevant? But it is. And as we do podcast interviews, we share stories about the personal development and transformation we've experienced by getting visible on podcasts. So, and then in turn, when we're interviewed about this stuff, we share our own journey with with transformation and the breakthroughs we've had and the breakdowns and the successes and the failures and all of that. So, what part of your story and your journey made you who you are? Maybe it doesn't seem relevant, but it is when you had the opportunity in a long form interview to share about it. So, this is my amazing business partner, Margie. She is the CEO and co-owner of Interview Connections. And so just a brief, background. Margie and I have known each other for a long time. We worked together at a job before I started Interview Connections. And so long story short, she came on as a contractor for Interview Connections, was first employee, and then 50% co-owner. And so in the journey over the last few years of her being a co-owner, being an entrepreneur here at Interview Connections, she's really grown so much in sharing her story. So before she really worked on and shared her story beyond just like the story of the business, but her personal story, she was getting interviewed on podcasts to talk about her expertise in podcast guesting and podcast booking in business. But there was sort of a lack of excitement in creating content and getting interviewed about the same thing all the time. I mean, literally, she just got bored after a while, as we all do, because when you're not sharing your story and when you're not talking about things you're passionate about, it just gets so monotonous. You're like, I cannot talk about this anymore. I'm talked about it a million times. You have to share your story to keep the excitement alive. So Margie really leaned into her personal intellectual property. She's writing a book. She worked on a keynote. She put out her own podcast called We Get It, Your Dad Died, which won first prize for best podcast at the Rhode Island Film Festival. I think it's the Rhode Island International Film Festival. And this podcast that she created is all about high performers and grief. And it provided the platform for her to share her story of losing her dad to suicide. And she now speaks on podcasts, not only about podcast guesting and about business, but also her story, her journey with mental health, a variety of other business topics, and her personal passion for animal rescue, which is a huge part of her story as well. And so now people really know her, not just for her role in the business, but for who she is. And she has so much more excitement and aliveness as she's doing interviews. The brand is strengthened. We have people that want to work with us because of the stories she shares and the values that are demonstrated through the stories that she's sharing. So share in the chat, in the comments, what possibilities do you see for how you can infuse your personal story more into your podcast interviews? Like, what about your personal story do you feel like, wow, this is a huge part of me. This is something I'm really passionate about. And I haven't talked about it because it doesn't really feel relevant to like the brand I'm building. But I promise you, if it's about you, there is relevance, and you just have to infuse it into the stories and into your journey in a way that's authentic, because that's really what will attract people to you. So, the second thing we're talking about today is writing interview topics and questions that support your brand. So, as many of you know, if you're a podcast host and you've been pitched, it's a lot easier to say yes to a potential guest if they're suggesting really good interview topics that clearly communicate the expertise that they're going to bring to your show, and interview topics that communicate the pain points that your listeners are looking for solutions in. So, I want to give some examples. So, this is our client, Vasavi Kumar. She's incredible. And I did some coaching with her on her interview topics. So, she has got great speaking topics, and we just transformed them so they are more applicable to podcast topics. So, her speaking topic, confidence, we wrote as cultivating self trust and acceptance so that you energetically attract your dream clients. And this is a great topic because a podcast host who has an audience that is made up of people who are trying to attract their dream clients is going to read this and say, okay, well, she's definitely going to help solve a problem that my listeners have. And a show that knows their listeners are interested in self-trust, are interested in energy, and are interested in confidence. This is going to hit the nail on the head. So confidence is a broad topic, but writing this out in this way allows Vasavi to communicate her unique take on confidence and how she teaches confidence, and what does confidence allow people to attract into their business and into their life. So you want to make sure your interview topics are strengthening your brand by communicating your expertise, as well as the solution to the problems that your target audience has. The second example is embracing imposter syndrome, which is interesting. Like, it definitely piques my curiosity of like, ooh, imposter syndrome is usually something we like want to steer away from because it's, not a good feeling to have imposter syndrome. So that's interesting. But I said, like, say more about that, because I think there's just not quite enough there for a host to go, oh, yes, I want to talk about that. So upon her sharing more about what that means, we wrote the topic, Imposter Syndrome is the key to cleaning up the mess you're hiding, which again just piques even more curiosity and interest. It's a little bit of a controversial statement, which is really good, right? Like, interview topics that kind of pique interest and feel a little bit like not everyone is out there talking about this. It definitely makes podcast hosts want to interview you about it. So there's so many aspects of this topic that a host could go, well, okay, tell me more about imposter syndrome. What do you mean it's like the key to cleaning up the mess? And what mess are you hiding? Like, there's so many aspects to this that raise interest and curiosity. So it strengthens her brand, because your brand will be stronger when you have conviction about your viewpoints that may be a little different from everyone else in the market, right? So think about these strong brands that really stand out to you. Chances are they have conviction around a viewpoint that not everyone shares necessarily or is willing to really speak out about. And then the last example here is storytelling. And storytelling is a great topic because so many people want to learn how to be a better storyteller. But just on the surface, just storytelling, it's like, well, what about storytelling do you want to talk about? So her podcast topic is how to change your personal narrative so you become a more magnetic storyteller. So again, it is communicating her expertise, and it's touching on the solution that her target audience wants. Her target audience wants to be more magnetic. They want to attract more clients. They want to attract people who want to hear from them, right? And then how to change your personal narrative. Well, what do you mean change my personal narrative? Like, it just piques curiosity, it shows her expertise, and it's connecting to a solution that her target audience is seeking. So these are really strong interview topics. So to strengthen your brand as a guest expert, it first starts with having interview topics that communicate your thought leadership and your unique value that you can bring to a show. So, magnetically attract new clients and listeners with stories. So, first of all, you need to tell stories in your podcast interviews. It's so important that you are not just giving answers to the question. You're not just doing, here's how to do this, here's how to do this. You have to tell stories. You have to drop people into a moment, like the sights, the smells, the feelings of the moment. Don't be self-conscious about your stories and don't breeze over them. This is a big mistake that I hear when we audit. One of the things that we do for our clients at Interview Connections is we listen to their interviews and provide specific feedback to help them improve their skills as a guest expert interviewee. And one of the things that we listen for is, are they telling a story but kind of breezing over it so fast? And that really comes from some self-conscious or lack of confidence. Like if you're not sure the story is that interesting, you'll just be like, yeah, this happened, then you'll keep going on. Don't be afraid to slow down and like take that time. So one of the stories that I share on podcasts is when people ask me, well, so tell me the story about how you made your first employee a 50% co-owner. And I will drop people into the moment of like being in a yoga class and knowing that I was in a big breakdown. Like I had achieved this goal of growing this 6-figure business and having full-time employees in a local office. Like I had hit the big goals that I set out and I was not happy. And I knew that I didn't want to keep doing it. Like something had to change. And I remember meditating on it. I was in this like vinyasa yoga class on a Sunday morning and just deep in meditation, I quieted my mind. I got rid of all the opinions of other people. And I just asked myself, like, what do you want? And clear as day, making Margie my co-owner, 50% equity owner was what I wanted. And what followed there was a lot more to the story, right? Because I had to then battle like, well, what if, is this the right thing? And reading articles and getting opinions from people I respected, but not talking to too many people about it. And, how that ended through different conversations and, light negotiating, I wrote out basically a platonic love letter. I literally wrote out a handwritten letter and handed it to Margie, communicating that I want her to be the 50% owner. And we sealed the deal. We got a lawyer, we drew up our shareholders agreement, and I don't regret that decision at all. It's been the best thing that's ever happened to this business. So that is a story that I can drop people into. You can hear and imagine me laying on that yoga floor. You can imagine me like grappling with a life-changing decision where people thought I was crazy. I did not sell her equity. She did not buy into it. I literally gave her half the business. And it was something that I trusted my intuition. So part of not being self-conscious is not breezing over it so fast. Leave those pregnant pauses. Don't be afraid to say something powerful and stop. Because when you breeze over something so fast, it shows a lack of confidence. So bring people to the sights, smells, feelings of the moment. Take those pauses. People will literally be like, what happened next? Right? And then the last tip here is to act as if everyone in the audience paid $10,000 to hear your interview. This is something our client, Kristen Bowen, shared with us. She's achieved incredible results from being a podcast guest and being interviewed about her story, about her business, about the product she sells. And that is her mindset and her energy. She goes on podcasts with that feeling and that energy that everyone has paid to hear her speak. And being on podcasts that are free, right? This is earned media. People aren't paying you to do it. You're not paying the host to do it. Oftentimes people can kind of write it off like, just doing this free interview, whatever. But really show up as if everyone has invested a lot of money in hearing you speak, because they've invested their time, and time is something nobody can get back, right? There's always more money, but time is something people can't get back. So really take the time seriously, because when you take the interview seriously at that level, people feel that energy. They feel that commitment and they want to be connected with people that take their time that seriously. All right. Give a call to action. So you've given you've got great interview topics. You get booked. You do a great show. You tell stories. You've got an energy to serve. You're attracting people by really communicating through your energy that you value their time, that you want to serve. You're over delivering. Your call to action is a lever you pull in order to direct listeners into your ecosystem. So, as you know, when you interview guests, you'll say, where can people learn more about you? Where can our listeners connect with you? And this, as a guest, is really, really important. Where is the one place you can send listeners to that will get them into your ecosystem? So, your call to action must be free, or it can be very low price, like a book. It has to be one thing. And this is often very difficult because people want to you can listen to my podcast. You can find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Like, don't give people a menu of options because a confused mind says no. Give them one option. It has to be valuable to the listeners. So make sure whatever you're telling people to do, the resource that you're sending, make sure it's something that's going to bring them value. And it has to be the next intentional stop on the journey a client makes from when they first hear about you to when they become your client. So a lot of times when people get interviewed on podcasts, they're like, yeah, but I didn't get any results from it. Well, what do you mean? Well, I got interviewed a couple podcasts. I never got clients from it. People typically don't buy from you the first time they hear you. They have to be nurtured. They have to spend more time with you. They have to build more trust in what you do and who you are. So don't be impatient. You have to bring people on a journey and make sure that you're continuing to nurture them and give them value. So what is that natural next step? If somebody hears you for the first time, where's the next place they should go? If you're consistently publishing podcasts every single week, having them go listen to your podcast is a great next step. So here are some simple calls to action that work, right? If you have an online community, like a Facebook group, you could send them to your Facebook group, like our client Giatsna does. You could send them to a quiz. We've got a couple clients that do that. Like, what kind of veggie are you? Our client Kathy helps people with living a plant-based lifestyle. You can send them to your podcast. You can invite them to schedule a free consultation call and get a copy of your book. Keep it simple. Don't overthink it. So let's map out your podcast guesting strategy. So what stops people from delivering brand strengthening interviews is consistency. So we've talked a lot today about, having the right interview topics and questions, delivering really compelling stories, giving a call to action. But honestly, those tips are kind of pointless if you're not out there getting interviewed on a consistent basis. The only way to develop really good interview topics is to get interviewed, because you'll come up with better and better ideas based off of the questions hosts are asking you. The only way to get better at storytelling is to tell a lot of stories. And the only way to know what the best call to action is to deliver a call to action, test it, see if it works, and try a new one if it's not working. You have to be consistently doing podcast interviews as a guest if you want to see your brand get strengthened. So getting interviewed on a podcast every week is the consistency we see work best for business owners and podcasters who want to see results. Less than that, it is difficult to gain the momentum needed to see results. So I want to invite you all, monetizethemic.training.com, to apply for a free training about our Monetize the Mic 3-part framework. So this is a free training. In full transparency, it's by application only because this is designed for business owners and entrepreneurs. So you'll just fill out a brief application so we can get to know you. And if it looks like a good fit for you, we will send it right over. It's totally free. And it goes into depth. Like, this is our best training about how to monetize the mic, how to use interviews on other people's podcasts as a way to generate leads and take your business to the next level. So thank you so much. Our website is interviewconnections.com. But again, monetizethemictraining.com takes you right to that free training. So we are ready. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I would be happy to take any questions. And I'm sorry, I didn't get a chance I couldn't look at the chat while I was going through that presentation. So I apologize for not engaging with you guys in the middle of the presentation. So I don't know if Dot wants to come back on and facilitate the questions. Hi, Dot.
Hi, Jessica. I have several questions if we don't see any here, but I'm going to kind of defer to anybody here. Well, I don't see one, so I'll slip one in. You were talking about storytelling, and the big mistake people make is they breeze past storytelling. I'm wondering, what are some of the other mistakes people make when they're establishing their brand in a podcast interview? What are some of the other big ones you say that we don't want to do?
Yeah. So I would say it's the biggest thing is confidence, because when we're talking about strengthening your brand, it's really important to be confident. And it's funny because one of the interview topics that I gave as an example was imposter syndrome, right? And so that is often what holds so many people back. They feel like they're not at the level yet where they have a brand to strengthen, or they're not at the level yet where they can speak with full conviction and authority. So I would just say that the big mistake that holds people back from really strengthening their brand is feeling like they're not at the level where they can be. So, or where they have the authority. And just remember, like, the first speaking opportunity I had was speaking at Podcast Movement, and I didn't even have my own podcast yet. I had been booking interviews as a booking agent, with my business interview connections, but I hadn't started my show, and I had some imposter syndrome. I was like, oh my God, like, can I, am I qualified to do this? Like, I was in my first year in business, but if I had said no to that opportunity, like, I wouldn't be where I am today. Like, so just say yes and like grab the mic and just be confident, because nobody feels confident at first. You have to just like get yourself on the court and start playing the game.
I really love that you addressed imposter syndrome, because all of us had it. And at the very core of that is fear. What worked for you in getting past the fear? Because there's fear in everything. People say they hate networking. That's fear too.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question, Dot. So this really speaks to the personal development and transformation I've done. So I did the Landmark Curriculum for Living in 2018. And this was a really big part of my journey. If anyone's familiar with Landmark, it's one of the biggest personal development education opportunities in the world. Tony Robbins went to Landmark. So this is has been around for a really long time. And so I did Landmark not really knowing what it was. Like, I had a client that did it, and she's like, yeah, it helped me make a lot more money. And I was like, cool, sign me up. And then I went, and it was like this very transformational, like a very intense experience. And I realized in that I had this really deep fear of rejection. And there was actually a moment at the seminar at Landmark where I wrote a book about podcast guesting, and I had just mentioned that in conversation with somebody at Landmark, and they were like, oh my gosh, you wrote a book? And I was like, yeah, but I'm not promoting it. And I realized that I had been holding back from promoting the work I had done because I was afraid people were going to reject it. I was afraid people weren't going to like it. And that was like such a big light bulb for me. I was like, oh my God, how many other areas of my life and my business am I holding myself back because I'm afraid of what people are going to think, right? So how many people here literally will not promote their show or their business because they're afraid that there's going to be haters, or they're afraid that people are going to say, oh, your show or your business isn't good or whatever. So the first step, acknowledge that you have the fear. Like, you have to acknowledge that it's in the room if you're going to get past it. So that's number one for me, just realizing that I had that fear of rejection. I was like, okay, now what are we going to do about it? Okay, you have to face it. You have to work through it. You have to face your fear. It's like why people have a fear of heights. They jump out of planes because they have to face it and realize it's actually not going to kill you. Literally, being rejected won't kill you. Promoting your show and having someone tell you it sucks, it's not going to kill you. Like, it's going to be okay. So you have to get past it and work through it. And I think there was another thing I was going to say about that, but I lost my train of thought. So Dot, you can feel free to ask another question. And if I think of it, I'll come back to it.
I have a couple, but I see that I Need Blue has a question too. And why don't we have them ask the question? Then if there's still time, I have another one.
Okay, perfect.
I Need Blue says they naturally want to breeze the story. What's the best way to get them to circle back to provide more details?
Oh, great. So this is really about like, as a host, how can you really slow listeners down to get them to share in more detail? So yeah, it's an interesting position as a podcast host because some guests are not as strong storytellers as you would like. So the simplest thing you could do is say, tell me more about that. Tell me more. Tell me more. And it really helps people open up when you create the space, because part of what has people feeling self-conscious about sharing more is they feel like, again, there's that fear of rejection, there's that feel of that fear that people don't want to hear the story. So as a host, I think the best thing you can do is create the space for them to share more. So if people don't share more, literally just saying, tell me more about that, tell me more about that, tell me more about that. It's the simplest thing, but try it out.
Can't see me nodding well, now you can see me nodding my head in agreement. You've got some radio people I see here from the comments, and all of us have actually professionally been used to say it quick. So that may be a little bit of a challenge.
That's a really good point. You sort of have to unlearn that, because on radio, and I've been on radio shows too, where it's like you have to be really, really concise. But if you have a long form show and people have the space to tell more details, definitely let them know that.
I'm wondering what's one of the most important lessons you've learned about building your brand with all the podcast interviews you've been on?
That's such a great question because it's hard to kind of put it all like, what's one big, concise thing. I would just say the biggest thing I've learned, I think, is that you've never really arrived. Like there's no destination at the point where, oh, I've built my brand. Oh, my brand is now strong. Like you are going to constantly feel like you need to strengthen it. You're going to constantly feel like there's more places to go. So I know it's super cliche and corny, but it is really about the journey. There's never a moment where you're just like, done. The brand is done. It's strengthened, because as soon as you get to the point where you're like, okay, cool, I've reached this point, you're going to have grown. And then you're going to want to update, kind of the brand and your story and positioning even more. So just know that there's never a point in which you arrive. There's always going to be more that you want to do. And hopefully that will put your mind at ease a little bit, because oftentimes we can be stressed that like we're not doing enough or we still have so much work to do. And I was actually just sharing with my team today, about some things in the business. And I literally I pulled up a system that we were using a year ago. And I'm like, guys, look at what we were using last year. Like, look how far we've come. Right. So oftentimes we're always thinking about where do we have to go? Where are we still working on getting to? But don't forget to look at where you've come from. Like if you've had your show for a few years and you've made some updates, listen to your first episode. Look at the artwork of your podcast when you first launched. If you've updated it, you have come so far.
I really hope I can stand listening to my first episode. That's such a great point. As everything is advancing in technology, how do we stay findable and discoverable? How do we stay relevant? What do you really love to do in those areas?
I'm honestly getting interviewed on podcasts. I know I'm a broken record, but the best thing you can do for discoverability is to keep getting out there on podcasts as a guest expert, because that's where people are discovering things. That's what keeps you relevant. That's where people are able to search. I mean, doing live streams like this are super helpful, but after a while, I mean, this is a little different. We're in Podcast Movement University, but if you do IGTV or, Instagram Live or Facebook Live, people see it kind of that day, but it's not going to be coming up in search results, right? When you get interviewed on somebody's podcast, that is going to be discoverable for years to come. Literally, people are finding interviews I did on other people's podcasts, from months ago, years ago. So go get interviewed on other people's podcasts. That's the best thing you can do.
Got a question about time management. I need Blue has another question.
Yes, I have an appearance tab on my website. Do you find this helpful? Yes, so good. So I definitely always recommend that, is to have a media page on your website or an appearance tab where you can spotlight the interviews that you've done on other people's podcasts. You can spotlight the media mentions you've gotten. That boosts your credibility. It also communicates to everyone on your website that you're available for interviews. And so you'll actually increase the number of incoming interview requests that you're getting if you promote the interviews you've done.
What a great suggestion, too. Wouldn't have occurred to me. What about time management? When you talk about getting on a podcast every week, if somebody's just an indie podcaster, what works well for managing time with everything else you're going to do?
Yeah, I mean, definitely do commit to the consistency that you can commit to, right? So if you're an indie podcaster and this is not like your full-time stream of income, you don't necessarily have to be doing an interview every single week. If you can commit to one a month, that's going to make a huge difference for you. If you're doing nothing right now and you're just podcasting, even getting interviewed once a month on somebody else's podcast is going to have an impact. So again, I'm making some broad recommendations, but just know that if I were to hear your personal situation, I may make a recommendation that's a little bit, different based off of where you are. So, and that's just an important lesson in general. So don't take all like blanket recommendations, like take them all with a grain of salt. But yeah, do the consistency that you can commit to. And then, there's a couple things you can batch them, right? So have specific times of your week where you are committed to visibility. So, right, maybe like every Saturday morning from 10 to 11, that's when you're committed to getting visibility for your show, right? So that's when you're going to go do a live stream on somebody else's platform. That's when you're going to do an interview on somebody else's platform. So like have it scheduled into your calendar and just commit to it.
Thank you. I would love, if nobody else has any questions, I'd love to look at something that you said on one of your podcast episodes. If it doesn't take us too far off track, you talk about adding value to the host beyond the interview. What are some of the best ways to do that if you're building your brand?
Yeah. So adding value to the host. So the best thing that you can do, number one, when you're interviewed as a guest is prepare, right? Listen to the host show, read about them, learn what they do. What is their, if they're a business owner, what is their business? Why do they have a show? So learn as much about the host. And before the interview recording starts in that green room chat, ask the host, how can I serve you? Like, what can I do to make you look good in this interview? Because hosts every single, episode are featuring their guest. So as a guest, if you can actually turn that around and say, I'm here to serve you. Like, what can I do to make this a great episode for your audience?
I love that. And I love something that you said in the course of, this is more of a comment than a question, but you said a confused mind says no. That is such a great point. I really love that.
It's so true. People, if given too many options, they will just be like a deer in headlights and they'll just say no and they'll move on to something else.
Sure, I'm thinking of going shopping, and when some people come out, do you want this? Do you want that? Do you want the other? I want to leave.
They literally, there's a thing called decision fatigue. If people are that's why you don't want to do sales calls at the end of the day, because people are so tired of making decisions all day that they just want to put it off. So yeah, people get tired from all the decisions. So if you have them, if you say, oh, decide from my 5 options what you want to do, they're going to be so tired. They're going to say nothing at all.
I would completely say no to 5 options.
Yeah.
If you could only tell people here one thing about building a podcast brand and they were running past you to catch an elevator, what would you tell them?
Oh my God. Okay. One thing, you're running to catch an elevator about building a podcast brand. I get interviewed on other people's podcasts. Like that's honestly, I know. I'm like, I am the poster child for getting interviewed on other people's podcasts, but that's just it. Like that is the way. If you want to build your podcast brand, you want to grow your audience, what do you need to do? You need to get exposure to podcast listeners. Where are podcast listeners? They're listening to podcasts. Like it is the most obvious thing. And so again, it's like, people, what should I do? Go get interviewed. Like that is literally every training I've been on with other podcasters, like talking about growing an audience. It's always go get interviewed, because also not only are you getting visibility to podcast listeners who will then go listen to your show, you'll be a better host. When you get interviewed, you will show up as a better host on your show. And the better your show is, the more listeners are going to want to keep listening. So, yeah.
How have you grown as a host from being interviewed on all these podcasts? What's been some of the most important training you've had?
So say that again, Dot.
What have you learned about being a host? How have you grown as a host from being interviewed on all the podcast appearances you made?
Oh,
from being a guest, what did you learn that you really like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So because I love hosting. I get interviewed a lot, but I love interviewing people on our show as well. I think the number one thing I've learned is like, you have to be really genuinely interested in your guest, and you have to really focus on your skills as a listener. The best interviewers are really good listeners. Like they are completely focused. You need to be hydrated because it's really hard to listen if you're not hydrated. You need to eliminate distractions. You need to be really mindful and present and in the moment. But the best questions get the best answers. And in order to ask really good questions, you have to be so in tune to what the guest is saying. And we book hundreds of interviews every month, and the feedback we get when a client says they had a bad experience on a show, it's usually like the host just like asked them a list of questions and it didn't feel like they were paying attention or really connecting. So be a really good listener. Work on your skills as a deep listener. That will make you a better host.
Thank you. I'm looking to see if anybody else has any questions. I feel like I'm taking over here. I don't want to. I sure would love to ask another question, which is, what if you are a guest on a show and the host is doing that? A, B, C, who just goes down the list of questions. How can you make that a positive experience and build your brand when all they're doing is being robotic?
Yeah, I mean, you really can only do so much because it's not your show. It really does challenge you as a guest because when they are being kind of robotic and not asking follow-up questions, I just try to match their energy. So the more you can match their energy, the best. So if they do just like a Q&A format and it's not back and forth, just give short, concise answers. But yeah, sometimes you just have to raise the energy a little bit and know that not everyone is a great interviewer, and that's okay. So having compassion and understanding that, all right, being a conversational interviewer is not their strength, but I'm grateful for the opportunity because if you got interviewed by like 10 out of 10 incredible interviewers every time, you wouldn't really be challenged to improve your skills as a storyteller. So look at the glass half full there.
What a great point about compassion, especially these days. I see a great question from Apologetics Guy.
I'm a host for my school podcast. How amazing. But I want to start a podcast on my YouTube channel. How can I leverage my platform so I can't if I can't directly promote my vodcast? Okay. I am not exactly sure. I'm a host of my I just got to read your question again. How can I leverage my platform if I can't directly promote my vodcast on the podcast? So like you can't promote your vodcast on somebody else's podcast? I feel like I need to ask follow-up questions to fully understand and know what the best answer is. I'm sorry. I know apologetics. I apologize. Apologetics guy. I'm not exactly sure how to answer your question. I think we'll have to move on, Dot, unless he can give some more clarification.
What about some links where people can reach out? You've already mentioned the free training for which people can apply. Where can people also reach you and find out more about what you're doing in the next few months?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the best place to go is interviewconnections.com. So like everything that we do is linked there. Like that's the home base. So whether you want to listen to our podcast or check out one of our free master classes, interviewconnections.com is where you're going to find everything that you need. So I would just go to our website and then you can kind of figure out what we have, listen to our podcast, all that stuff. So I'm not going to give you a menu. Go to interviewconnections.com.
Only one option because a confused mind says no.
Yeah, exactly.
Here is the explanation for that question. The apologetics guy says he's the host for the school show. It sounds like he's saying that it's the school. He can't really promote it on the school channel.
Yeah, I guess you just have to decide like, well, what brand do you want to build? Because if you want to go on other podcasts to build the school's brand, then it seems like it's in their best interest to promote the vodcast. But if you're trying to build your own personal brand, then you got to create a brand. All right, let's go to Dwayne. Have you ever did an interview where you answer some questions that was hard while doing an interview? Is it rude to change the question instead of answering a tough question? Great question. So, I mean, there's again, multiple different ways this could go, right? So sometimes people will if people ask you a question and it's like personal and you're like, I'm not going to go there. I think you can okay, so let me back up. Number one, before the recording starts, find out if they edit it. So find out if they edit the show, because if there is something where you're like, listen, I can't answer that, I'm not sure how to answer that, it's helpful to know if they're able to edit that out. So that's number one. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I literally just did it right now, right? Where you're just like, I'm actually not sure how to answer that. Can you rephrase your question? and just kind of put it back to them. But I guess I'm just not sure what an example of a tough question would be. Is it something that it's like asking you, because sometimes that happens right with me where they ask like a very technical question that's like tangential to the podcasting industry, but I'm like, that's not really my zone. Like, that's not really my area of expertise, even though it seems like I would know everything. I really don't. So sometimes you just have to tell people, I don't know. And that's okay. There's a lot of power in just saying what you don't know.
And a lot of times it seems that when somebody says, I don't know, that establishes them more as the expert. People that are really experts will say, I don't know.
Yep. It's totally okay not to know.
If no one else has any questions, I'd love to know what final thoughts you might like to share about building your brand without anything relating to interviews.
I would just say it's consistency, right? There's no, like I said before, you don't build a brand overnight. And just know why you're building your brand. You know, what is your goal for it? What type of impact are you trying to have with your brand? That will help you get a lot of clarity around the results that you want to create with your brand. So have that goal of why do you want to create a brand, and that will help you know what topics you want to talk about, where you want to send listeners to, things like that.
Fantastic. Thank you. I am seeing a comment here from Steve. What I don't really see is a question.
I don't think there's any questions there yet. Well, thanks for being here, Steve.
Seriously. Thank you to everybody. My final question for you is, if you were asking you a question right now about building your brand on interview podcasts, what would you ask yourself that I have not asked you?
Oh, a great question and a question. I guess I would ask, what is a brand? Because when people hear brand, oftentimes they think like, oh, you mean like my artwork or my fonts or what my website look like. That's an element of it, right? You want the visual representation of your brand to be in alignment. But really, your brand, what it is a representation of your values and your vision and what you stand for, right? So you got to get clear on all of that in order to really know, what your brand is.
And you know what? I completely took that for granted when we talked about building a brand, because to me, brand meant representation. Jessica, thank you for an amazing training. This was incredible this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Dot. And thank you everyone for being here live. I appreciate all of your time.